Today we find the reason why my 2014 EBR 1190RX does not run, and a little hint, it has to do with this section here and the fuel pump needing to be removed again for the second time. But we figure out the problem, and it's pretty ridiculous. Stay tuned. Alright, so we have the fuel pump pulled out, still all hooked up, connector under the seat still hooked up, but when I turn the key, notice there's no whooshing sound. It's not activating. So let's tap on it like an old kind of like style starter where the armature gets stuck. Let's see if that works. Tapping on the starter did in fact do nothing. It was still not working. So then I started tracing wires to try to figure out what's going on. I tried using my multimeter, but this thing is junk and it's not currently giving me readings to really anything. So kind of poking around with some alligator clips, and here's what I found. So this connector up here is where the fuel pump harness from underneath the seat runs into here, connects into here, goes all the way down, splits off, red and black for the fuel pump, and then the other two colors, I think it's brown and green, go to the fuel float. So right now, just a easy point of contact, because there's solder joints I can clip the alligator clips onto. I have it clipped on. So basically what I'm doing is, this is the harness underneath the seat. Sorry about the straps, because the swing arm's missing. I had to support the bike from the ceiling. So this is the connector that gets connected by the seat. That's real common to go. One of these pins being bent, but I never had that issue. Anyways, so power goes from the battery to the box here. There's some relays and there's a fuel pump fuse, and then from that point it wraps around and goes to this connector here, which connects into, this is the fuel pump harness that is attached, runs all the way down through the bike, and is attached directly right there. So what I'm doing right now is I bypassed this connector altogether. So I'm going straight from the battery and relay box from here directly to the fuel pump here. Then when you turn the key off, primes again. So what this tells me is that the relays and all that stuff are sending power to this point. Now I need to see if the problem lies between this point and the fuel pump itself. So here's how I'm going to figure that out. Alright, so now to determine if the issue is from this connector to the pump itself, I clip the negative cable onto the pump, goes directly to the battery, so it's getting the negative connection going directly to the battery. Now, the positive we have hooked to the battery as well. So in essence, we're force feeding it juice from the battery to this point, and the negative cable is connected here. So we're using the positive cable inside the harness. We're testing the positive port here, make sure that works. So let's see what happens. Alright, so what this tells us is that the positive side of this cable going from this point to the harness is good. So let's reverse this and check the negative side. Alright, so now we have things flipped. We have the positive alligator clip onto the positive here, running all the way up and connecting directly into the battery. The negative side, we have it going around, and we're gonna test the negative side of this connector. So all we have to do is tap the negative side here, and it is not doing anything. So presumably what this means is that there is an issue with the negative pin side here, the negative cable from this point to this point. So to kind of verify that, we'll take this negative alligator clip and we'll attach it to the negative side. So we're connecting direct voltage from the battery to the fuel pump itself. Go back up here just to double check. Tapping the pin on the negative side and it's not doing anything. So what this tells me is that 1, the fuel pump is good, and 2, that the actual underlying issue is somewhere with this connector to the harness down to this point. So there's a break in the ground somewhere along the line. So what we'll be looking for is a pinched wire, broken wire, but we'll have to remove this further, this cable, unsnake it here, remove the casing, and let's see what we can find. Alright, just as a side note, whenever you're testing this fuel pump dry, be careful not to overdo it because you can easily burn out the pump, because the fuel is actually the portion that kind of keeps the pump cool. It lubricates it. Now, also, you drain the gas out, you're dealing with fuel vapors and all that stuff, and also electrical systems whenever you're poking around testing. I definitely recommend using a multimeter. Mine, unfortunately, has been on the fritz, and it's not really accurate at all. So that's why I'm using the alligator clips and the battery. So if you do it this way, be sure not to create any sparks because there's a lot of fuel and fuel vapors around, and you don't want to ignite your prized possession. So here's the sheathing that I need to remove to inspect the wires. I'll remove it, pour it back in a minute. So I checked the wire casing after we took the sheathing off, even checked this connector to make sure the pins are nice and solid. Everything looks good. There's no pinched wires, there's no frayed wires, nothing. So basically, you know, you have these 4 wires that go all the way down, and they go into a 90-degree piece that goes inside of here, that snakes through and plugs directly into the fuel pump, and then 2 wires go off for the fuel float. That connector looks like such, and it kind of goes in here. There's a snap ring on the end of it. There's a rubber piece that covers these exposed wires, but I hacked this out and then yanked it out because I actually believe this is the issue why my fuel pump is not working, and let me show you why. So again, just as another test, we have everything hooked up to the bike, running down, and I have 2 alligator clips, one on the positive, one on the negative, going and plugging into the harness down here. So once I turn the key on and off, the fuel pump primes like it should. So when power is sent directly to this point, we already know it's working. So the only remaining factor is this guy that was in the system. So what we're going to do is, in essence, put this back in here, and we're going to test individually the positive side of this and then the negative side of this and see what happens. Okay, now we have it hooked up pretty much the same. We have the negative still hooked up, and now we have the positive going through this connector like it would have been on the fuel pump. We have the alligator clip going from the fuel pump harness down here all the way up to the connector that would have been in there, and then we're going to tap the positive side together here and turn the key. So in essence, we are checking to see if continuity goes through this little connector for the red wire, the positive. So let me set the camera down here, hold this together like such. Let me aim this down at the fuel pump, and we'll see what happens. Alright, so the positive side of this wire going through this connector is working. So let's reverse it and we'll check the ground. Okay, so now, similar setup, just opposite. Positive is going directly from the harness, skipping this connector, going directly to the fuel pump, but the negative is snaking up from the fuel pump harness, going through this 90-degree connector, and then up to the harness up there. So with these touching, we're going to turn the key and check to see if power is going through this connector. Nope. So just as suspected, there's actually a ground issue inside of this connector, which is very interesting because it looks like it's well made. So the 4 wires go through, they do a 90, they go down to here, and then this is where the solder joints are. And the solder joints themselves appear to be in good condition. They're not broken. I don't see any frayed wires. They're not loose. So something internally from this point to this point on the negative side of things inside of here is broken. So it's crazy to think that this little connector on the fuel pump was causing my intermittent fuel pump. Now there could still be an intermittent problem with the fuel pump itself to where it's kind of acting like an old starter where it's seizing up, but once I got to this point, I no longer think that's the issue. I think the fuel pump itself is good. It's just a bad grounding issue inside this little connector, and obviously you can't just go out to EBR and replace this connector. Now most people, once they get to this point, you're gonna want to replace the entire fuel pump assembly. So you're gonna be forking up $300 to $600. And whenever I first had my fuel pump issue, I was calling a few different EBR supplying dealers, and the best price that I got was like $420 for a brand new fuel pump. So what actually I'm going to be doing is I am going to see if I can drill this out, because it's just got some potting epoxy on here. Drill this out, put my own wires in here, repot the connector, do a small new harness in here to plug up to there, and get this thing working. Now I'm also going to be replacing the fuel pump with an aftermarket unit just in case. That I will have a video on. This I probably will not, because I feel like a majority of people, once you get to this point, more than likely you're just going to replace the whole unit. But if anything, this at least shows you that there's other issues other than the connections under here that get loose, the crimp connectors on here, because if it's the crimp connectors on a 2014 model like mine, the only issue that you would have would be for the fuel float not working, not an intermittent fuel pump. So it's a very interesting problem. So hopefully this video shows other people how to diagnose some of this stuff and the means to go about it. And yeah, I mean, at this point, a majority of people will probably just replace the fuel pump, but instead of spending $400 on a new fuel pump, I spent $60 on an aftermarket unit that I'm going to be putting in, and then $5 for the gas resistant shrink tubing. I already have the solder, all that stuff. So basically, all in, also new O-rings, I'll probably have $70, including the new float, for this kind of, I guess you'd say, a refurbished fuel pump assembly. So it's not the prettiest thing, but here is that joint that was at the top of the fuel pump, that 90-degree piece where my wire was broke. Somewhere inside of here, this is it all drilled out. So there's a bunch of potting epoxy in here that I ground down with the Dremel, and it's a little bit shorter. I did kind of have to nip the end of it off, which is right here. So it looks pretty ugly, but should work out just fine. So there's 2 O-rings on the end of this. It sits like this, like such, and 1 O-ring there, 1 O-ring there, and then the wires come out the bottom here. So I tried to get just this metal piece out with pliers, so that's why this is kind of all messed up, and then that's where the snap ring goes on to. But this I just had to admit defeat and cut off. Now what's interesting was I was able to remove one of the pins from inside of here, and this is pretty much what it looks like. So when it goes through the top here, it does a hard 90, then you have this piece inside of there. So you have one solder joint going in here, and another solder joint at the bottom, and that's what sticks out at the bottom of this piece right here. So in essence, there's 4 of these inside of this little connector. So I imagine one of those broke apart somehow. I don't know, because it's all encapsulated. I don't know if there's an air pocket or what. Corrosion maybe, who knows, but the ground wire inside of this was bad. So unfortunately, with grinding this down to get the wires out, I did have to destroy the wires, so I couldn't see the condition of them once I opened this up. But now I could put new wires in here doing a 90-degree. I'm not going to do any solder joint inside of here. And then I have encapsulating epoxy that I'll be putting on as well. Basically, I'm going to end the video here. And if you like what you saw, be sure to give me a like, a thumbs up, If you want to see stuff in the future, be sure to subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, be sure to comment down below. So, fingers crossed, at the end of this, after this little clip, this outro, hopefully you will see this bike running. Fingers crossed. Thanks for watching.